Coca Cola and Pepsi left their mark on the 80s like only a few other companies have. They used the social conflict of the 80s to their advantage and branded themselves as complete opposite sides of society. In the process, they turned millions in advertising budget into billions in revenue. To better understand why the branding strategies of both of these companies worked so well, we first have to understand the historical context of the 80s and its effect on marketing and advertising in general. So, let's take a trip back in time to old tastes and weird hairdos. The 80s started with a literal bang. In May 1980, mountains and hounds erupted, killing 57 people and thousands of animals. Ronald Reagan became president, declaring the war on drugs. John Lennon was killed in New York City by a crazy fan, and unfortunately, John Lennon wasn't the only person to be killed or attempted to be killed during the 80s. Marvin Gaye, a famous soul artist, was killed by his own father, and Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II survived assassination attempts. There was a massive famine in Ethiopia caused by its extremely corrupt country leaders, which resulted in a Live Aid concert that generated millions to support the people of Ethiopia. In '86, the Challenger space shuttle explodes live on TV, killing the entire crew and halting the space shuttle program for almost 3 years.
My God. 1 minute 15. There's been an explosion.
3 months later, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor in Ukraine explodes, turning this entire area into a nuclear wasteland and creating the anti-nuclear movement. The end of the 80s also marked the end of communism and socialism, as every major socialistic country experienced riots and protests. For instance, China. In China, 2,600 protesters and soldiers were killed in the Tiananmen massacre in Beijing. The protests in Germany remained peaceful, with the fall of the Berlin Wall marking the end of the Cold War. Overall, the decade was shaped by several strong influences, like the rising awareness for global warming, the Cold War between East and West, globalization of manufacturing, massive population growth in Asia, AIDS and the crack epidemic in major US cities, and women gaining a bigger role as consumers due to more and more women embracing the feministic movement and earning their own living to be independent of men. Meanwhile, urbanization gained momentum, and especially in cultural hotspots like Los Angeles, led to stark contrasts in lifestyles between de facto neighbors. Sneaking a peek at the rich and famous by day and selling drugs at night was just any other day for a growing number of kids. Kids coming from broken homes, as divorce rates had reached a peak in the 80s. In the end, the generation of the 80s, also known as Gen X, was the generation with the deepest divide within itself, with seemingly sides of pure black and white, with very little space for grey areas between them. Creating an even bigger contrast between young and old was the way the technological advancements started to speed up. Important foundational technologies for today's digital society were introduced or made their breakthrough in the 80s. Among them were the VHS video recording system, which freed media consumption of rigid TV station schedules; Sony's Walkman, which marked the first time that music could be consumed away from home on your own; the introduction of the first PC in Macintosh; mobile phones saw their first commercially available versions; CDs were introduced as better storage device for media; and of course, the internet and the World Wide Web were invented. So, on the one hand, we see amazing technological advancements to make life better, and the traditional American society is longing for a return of the American dream and a time to finally take a breather again and a way to forget the 70s and its Vietnam War. On the other hand, we have these massive tragedies, social struggle and inequalities. This looks like the perfect breeding ground to split an already tense society even further. Pop culture, media and marketing played a major role to drive an even bigger wedge between both sides. Egotistical behavior was even celebrated and encouraged by the government under Reagan, who deregulated many pillars of society, like the deregulation of financial market, which gave rise to new popularity for Wall Street and greed.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
One part of Gen X obviously joined in on the celebration of these values, mostly the rich and those that wanted to be rich. The other part realized they would never belong with these folks and wanted to distance themselves. Distancing works best if you can actually show to which tribe you belong, either by your body's feature or by what you consume or wear, and this is where brands come into the picture. Consumers wanted to side with brands because they expressed who they were siding with during the social conflict. Two brands knew how to pit those conflicting parties against each other like no other. Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Both had very clear marketing messages and clearly defined their audience with some overlap. If you can describe your audience as clearly as either of these two companies, you're setting yourself up for massive success. If you then combine that with the classical marketing strategy of opposing sides, nothing can stop you. For Pepsi and Coca Cola, it was as easy as being on the complete opposite spectrum of society. Were you established or you wanted to belong to a different class, you drank Coke. You were the underdog, you drank Pepsi. Even though the Cola War started in the 70s, we saw the peak of confrontation during the 80s with a constant back and forth between both brands, effectively helping both brands achieve cult-like statuses. I guess I don't have to introduce Coca-Cola, as probably everyone drank a cool and refreshing Coke before. But here's what the brand actually stands for.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to buy the world a coat and keep it company. It's the real thing. What the world wants today.
This was Coca-Cola's most famous commercial from '71, and it perfectly represents what Coca-Cola stands for. A happy world, a world where everybody loves each other, an illusion, a traditional worldview. The marketing department of Coca-Cola does an excellent job spreading this worldview even today, but especially during the 80s. The campaign highlight for Coca-Cola was this Super Bowl commercial featuring a notoriously bad-tempered football player called Mean Joe Greene.
Want my Coke?
Okay.
A Coke and a smile makes me feel good, makes me feel nice around. That's the way it should be. I like to see
Hey, kid.
the whole world smiling with me. Coca-Cola as life. Have a Coke and thanks, Mean Joe. Smile.
Contrast this commercial with a commercial from Pepsi.
But that's your stuff to you. Hey, you're the Pepsi generation. Girls are down and taste the thrill of the day.
This one commercial made Pepsi's revenue skyrocket and even surpassed Coca-Cola for cans sold for 1984. The interesting part is they are not showing the opposite of a happy world, but a completely different reality. Coca-Cola shows the white kid from the perfect average American family, and he's most certainly not growing up in a big city. Joe Greene, the other part of this commercial, was a player from the 70s, meaning he was a star for 70s kids. The message of the commercial may very well be, we're traditional and stuck in the 70s. Pepsi, on the other hand, shows an urban environment, mixed races, dancing, having fun, and the pop star of the 80s, Michael Jackson, who had just had his biggest hit with Billie Jean in '83. This entire commercial screams new generation. Oh, by the way, do you remember the Live Aid concert from earlier? Well, guess who was one of the main sponsors? Pepsi played its image of new generation to perfection and closed the year with 7.7 billion in revenue. Pepsi increased its market share while Coca-Cola's dropped. This obviously put massive pressure on Coca-Cola as they had to deal with a new reality and new soda drinkers. Pepsi was even building on the legacy of a campaign from the 70s where they had people blind test the taste of Coke versus Pepsi and the majority chose Pepsi. Coca-Cola even confirmed these results in their own tests and saw, yes, people do prefer the taste of Pepsi over ours. That must have been a massive blow to the confidence of the juggernaut Coca-Cola, who never really considered Pepsi to be a worthy opponent.
Priceless.
Probably because of all of the pressure, Coke made a costly mistake in '85, introducing a new taste called New Coke.
Hi, we're New Edition, and we're here to introduce the great new taste of Coca-Cola, the taste of today.
That was a devastating marketing lesson for Coca-Cola. You may very well say that New Coke was the OG of shitstorms, even though the internet wasn't even invented yet. Loyal fans boycotted the new taste and demanded the old taste back. And within 79 days, Coke reintroduced the old taste as original Coke. The new Coke was eventually faded out, despite beliefs of the top management that the product was indeed superior. Let's look at what went wrong with the introduction of New Coke.
Recently, an independent research firm ran a taste test between Coke and Pepsi, and the taste more people chose was the taste of Coca-Cola.
Did they really believe that Pepsi sold more cans because of their superior taste? Here's the marketing lesson I want you to keep. Marketing is never about the features. People don't buy the features of your product, or in this case, the taste of your product. They buy the story behind your brand. That is what is adding value to their lives. Coca-Cola sells a feeling of tradition, a feeling of home, that some things will never change. You can always pick up your Coke and you know what you're going to get. That was especially true for a time when people would identify much more with brands than they do today. Today, nobody gives a shit about which cola they drink. Nobody would leave a restaurant just because they served the wrong kind of cola. Back then, cola was religion, and that was the reason why cola failed so miserably with New Coke. The reason why Pepsi was so successful was not their superior taste, but a better understanding of their audience. They understood that they couldn't change the mind of old soda drinkers, but they could position themselves as anti-Coke. The core message of the old commercials was, old folks are stupid for drinking something with inferior taste. There's something better for your generation. The contrast was old versus new, not taste versus taste. Pepsi even made fun of Coca-Cola for not realizing that in this commercial.
What's the matter, Wilbur?
They changed my Coke.
Something wrong with it?
I know, but they sure changed it.
Coulda asked.
What coulda?
Coca-Cola turned this disaster into a good thing despite resistance from management. They reconnected with their audience and came back stronger than ever before. The sales went up in '86, which may be a statistical anomaly, but considering the fact that they continued to grow for more than 30 years now, they must have done something right back then. Pepsi, on the other hand, did their own string of stupid mistakes and has now become meaningless as a way to express yourself. Therefore, the years 84 till 86 can be considered the peak of the cola wars and are a particularly good time to study for your own business. Even though the landscape of consumer behavior has changed a lot in the recent years and we have a lot of sub-factions, the strategy of opposing forces still works. Today's major trends include sustainability and healthy living and a turn away from egoism towards a more society-based approach. So pick your Coca-Cola and position yourself against them. In the next video, we will take a look at another company that used the social conflict of the 80s to their advantage, but with a different branding strategy. Nike. They signed an unproven high-profile NBA draft pick to a massive contract and propelled themselves into a completely new stratosphere of revenue, and in the process overtook the seemingly unbeatable giant Adidas to become the biggest sports brand in the world today. So if you want to know more, subscribe to this channel. Have a great day and continue to be awesome. See ya!
If he wants a Coke, just give him a Coke.